So Tucker Carlson did a surprising segment on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders' bill to limit interest rates to 15%. Let's take a look, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have a new proposal out. It's called the Loan Shark Prevention Act. Their bill would cap interest rates on credit cards at 15%. Well, for a lot of people, that would make a difference. The median interest rate on credit cards in this country right now is 21%, and some cards charge over 35%. Banks, meanwhile, can borrow money from the Federal Reserve at 3% interest. Do the math. It's a very good business. Now you know why they're always sending you those offers for new cards. They're getting rich from your debt. The bill would also apply the same 15% limit to consumer loans. It would ban, in effect, payday loans, those loans whose interest rates can exceed 500 or 600% every year. No doubt many Republicans in the Congress will oppose this bill, if only because of who sponsored it. Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez are obviously demagogues. They don't mean half of what they say. The other half they don't really understand. They're not impressive. But on this one issue, they are absolutely, indisputably right. There's a reason why the world's great religions condemn usury and why societies have restricted it for thousands of years. High interest rates exploit the weak. Credit card debt destroys people, not just chronically irresponsible people, but good people, decent people, probably some people you know, maybe a lot of people you know. What the banks are doing is disgusting, and it's wrong. So the real question is, why did it fall to a couple of childish socialists to point this out? There's no reason that capping interest rates ought to be a left-wing issue. Most normal people agree with it, overwhelmingly. South Dakota, for example, it's one of the most conservative states in the country. In 2016, its voters went for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton by 30 points. And yet those very same voters also voted overwhelmingly to crack down on payday loans and cap the interest rates on credit cards. Historically, fighting usury has been a Republican position. In 1991, Republicans sponsored legislation to cap credit card interest at 14%. That's lower than what Bernie Sanders is proposing right now. For perspective, President George H.W. Bush endorsed that bill, and the Senate passed it. So why isn't it the law today? Well, in the words of the Chicago Tribune at the time, quote, 5 days of intense lobbying by banking interests and a one-day plunge in the stock market killed the bill dead. After that, Republicans decided to cave permanently. They became the party of Wall Street. What's interesting, though, is that Wall Street is no longer Republican, not even close. Wall Street is the economic engine of the Democratic Party. Finance titans went overwhelmingly for Hillary over Trump in 2016. Chuck Schumer is their own personal senator. They all have his cell phone, trust me. Big finance is one of the most aggressively liberal sectors in this country. If you're watching this show, they despise you. That all became very obvious in the last presidential election. The only people who didn't get that clear message are Republicans in Washington. They're on autopilot, still siding with the big banks over their own voters. It's a lunatic strategy. It won't end well. What happens when you refuse to give people what they desperately need? They go elsewhere. Republicans should not be surprised when that happens.
Okay, so I have a lot to say about this. First of all, credit where it's due on saying, hey, 15% interest rate, capping interest rates at 15% makes sense. And it's not even close. It's obviously the right thing to do. It stops usury. It basically stops loan sharking. And this is the kind of stuff where big financial institutions screw regular people, and it's not their fault. So credit on that, and this is not something you would see anybody who would be a potential replacement for Tucker Carlson at this time slot saying. It just wouldn't happen. Which is why I always thought it was weird when it's like there's this advertiser boycott trying to get rid of Tucker, and I think it's rather obvious that he's more of a paleo-conservative than a neoconservative, and he would 100% be replaced by somebody more like Hannity, who's reliably wrong on every single issue, whereas at least Tucker has 2 or 3 areas where he'll surprise you and be right on it. So I just find it weird that it doesn't seem very thought out from a macro picture, the advertiser boycott against Tucker. And then also I think there's a even broader question about whether or not advertiser boycotts are reasonable in the first place. And I think everybody knows my opinion on that. Once you open up that door, first ones on the chopping block are the furthest left-wing voices. So, but anyway, I digress from that. The stuff that annoys me is the doublespeak. I mean, he really is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. So, first of all, Bernie and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are demagogues. They don't mean half of what they say, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they're childish socialists. This is one of those instances where, remember back when you were in high school and the teacher would correct something on your paper and write citation needed? Citation needed, dog. What do you mean? What do you mean they don't mean half of what they say? Really? How do you know that? You have no idea. What if they mean every single word of what they say? How about that? And by the way, that is the case. That is the case. I don't know Bernie, but I am a co-founder of Justice Democrats, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the most prominent Justice Democrat. She believes every word of what she says. So why the unnecessary fucking shivving in the side of these people? You're doing it because, you're still, to some extent, mired in partisanship. And you have to do the virtue signaling to the far right. Now, I'm not saying they're actually totally right, even though they're totally right. I still hate them. That's what you're doing. The idea that they're childish socialists. Tucker is smart enough to know that Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are mild social democrats. When you look at their canon of policy beliefs and stuff they would implement, it's like Denmark or Norway or Sweden. So he knows that they're not, quote, childish socialists. He knows that they're not that. But he says it anyway, again, because he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. And to the idea that they don't know what they're talking about. I would put Bernie Sanders or AOC's, knowledge on policy above literally any senator or congressperson on the right. Literally. And I'm 100% going to win that bet. There's no way I lose that bet. Because that's their front and center for them is policy. Now, Tucker might pretend like that's not the case, but that's all they do is talk about policy. And then the idea that they're demagogues. Why? Because they talk about things that are popular and people like it? Is that why they're demagogues? No, maybe they actually truly believe in these issues and they're putting them front and center. So it's just the unnecessary shivving in the side. But again, that serves a purpose. And then the other point that's just... This is the diversion. This is the bait and switch at the end of the segment is when he says, he's talking about how Wall Street and they're so bad. And then he goes, and it's obvious they're no longer Republican. They're massively liberal on Wall Street. Okay, Tucker. The fact that Wall Street executives are liberal on social issues means Dickie McGee's axe. It doesn't mean anything in the context of the economic issues that we're talking about. So they don't hate black people, and they don't hate gay people, and they don't hate immigrants. That's the extent of their liberalism. Now, in terms of on economic issues, they are deeply conservative and deeply in favor of our broken and disgusting status quo, which enriches them at the expense of everybody else in the country. Now, you're correct to point out that Wall Street executives and many owners of hedge funds and people like this, that they have backed Democratic politicians. They also back Republican politicians. In fact, it's a concerted effort on their part. It's a strategy by both political parties. They understand, hey, with the election, the winds change. That this is always the case. You're always going to, Democrats win this one. Oh, Republicans win this one. Oh, Democrats win this one. Oh, Republicans win this one. So what do? You hedge your bets. You say, I'll buy all the Republicans and I'll buy 80% of the Democrats because 20% of the Democrats are unbuyable. And then I'm good. No matter who wins, I'm going to get favorable policy. So it used to be the case that Democrats their special interests were just a lot less scary. It'd be teachers and lawyers and unions and environmentalists. So those used to be the Democratic special interests, and that's it. But then in the 1980s and onwards, they decided, hey, we could take money from Wall Street too, because Wall Street used to only give to Republicans. And so they started taking money, and then that's now where you get the breakdown of the two wings within the Democratic Party. You know, the Bernie Sanders wing, the Justice Democrats wing, the populist left wing, versus the corporate wing, the establishment wing. Now, what he's trying to do is make that a wash and just act like, well, it's just the establishment on the Democratic side, and Wall Street is all in for them. And that's not an accurate portrayal. The Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment, and I'd go as far as to say the entire Republican Party in Washington, D.C., with no exceptions, they're doing Wall Street's bidding. Now, this gets to the most important point here, which is, if Tucker Carlson is himself not a demagogue, well, he's repeatedly expressed these sorts of opinions. He said, well, you know, you should cap interest rates at 15%. Okay. Why is Jeff Bezos getting favorable policy and tax subsidies when we have our people are struggling in the country? Okay, so he agreed with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the Amazon thing as well. He's repeatedly gone after neocons and talked about how ending wars is something we should do, and it's terrible to do more of these regime change wars. Okay, good. We'll take it. He's also debated Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro argues for a free trade approach, which is just, in this country, outsourcing. Let's just send all of our jobs overseas and pay people $1 to do them and destroy the working class in this country. He's argued against Ben Shapiro and for a more protectionist approach to trade. Okay, good. I just gave you a list of policies that Tucker claims to support. But then he always gaslights and does the bait and switch at the end and says, and that's why, you know, we can never support these Democrats. And he takes these populist policy ideas and then redirects people to supporting Republicans. So that is a trick, because ultimately, all the policies I just gave you, who supports those positions? The only people in the country that do are the populist left, are the Justice Democrats, the All Revolution candidates, the Bernie Sanders style Democrats. So the so-called far left, the only people in the country, in Washington, D.C., who are fighting for the things that Tucker says he believes in. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ro Khanna, Tulsi Gabbard, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders. So listen, it's really a test as to how full of shit he is. If Tucker decides, yeah, I'm actually not messing around about supporting this list of policies that I just laid out, okay, then what happens if in the general election it's Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump? And according to your own words, you agree more with Bernie Sanders' philosophy than Donald Trump's philosophy. What then, Tucker? Are you going to come out in support of Bernie Sanders? Well, probably not. He's a Fox News host. He's on Fox News. Okay. Well, will you at least not openly support Donald Trump? Will you at least do, I don't know, maybe 50% critical coverage of Trump and 50% critical coverage of Bernie and kind of make it a wash so your audience doesn't know where you stand? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? See, that's a test as to whether or not he's a demagogue or not. If he's serious or if he's just trying to harness populist tendencies and redirect it for supporting standard Republican politicians. Now, I'm being kind and proposing this as a question. I'm not proposing this as we all know what he's going to do. Now, we all have an instinct as to what we think he's going to do, but let's leave that off the table for now. Let's just focus on putting this question out there. So, Tucker, are you a demagogue or are you not a demagogue? Are you going to have the courage of your convictions? Do you really believe the stuff you're saying when you're on the right side of issues? Or is it that all those issues are ancillary to you and the real thing you care about is fucking immigration? We got to keep those illegal immigrants out. We got to keep those brown folks coming through the Mexican border out. So that issue overrides all the other 4 or 5 issues I just explained where you're nominally on the left. Okay? And the immigration issue overrides all the other issues. So at the end of the day, hey, I got to support Trump because that issue is the king issue. It's the most important issue, and it's the one that supersedes and overrides all the other ones where I just said I kind of agree with the left wing on those issues. We'll see. We'll see now, won't we? But this is becoming a normal occurrence for Tucker, where he does the old, like, well, the left is right about ending wars. The non-interventionists are right about that. To be fair, Rand Paul and Justin Amash and some of the libertarians are right about that too. But Tucker says, hey, we should be more protectionist on trade. Yeah, we should crack down on Amazon. Yeah, we should crack down on the financial institutions and only let them charge 15% interest. Yeah, we should have policies that are more anti-Wall Street. If you say all those things and then ultimately you end up supporting Republican politicians, you didn't really mean all the stuff you were saying. Or simply the immigration issue where you agree with Republicans overrides all the shit you were saying about the issues where you're left-wing. So it's a test, man. Do you really believe it, or are you just demagoguing? Because the other possibility is he might be smart enough to realize, hey, the writing's on the wall for the elitists, and I can't be an elitist because nobody wants that. Nobody likes that. So I'm going to be populist, and then again, just use that to redirect to support standard Republican politicians, which is snake oil salesman 101. It's you would be the demagogue. You'd be, I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, and then, harness that energy and that support for you to support politicians who are not on the side of the shit we just expressed that we believe in. So we'll see. But needless to say, man, he was a supporter of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump ultimately has been an elitist president. His rhetoric was populist in many respects. But listen, when you appoint John Bolton and Mike Pompeo for foreign policy, and they're trying to topple Venezuela, they're trying to topple Iran, we're still in Iraq and Afghanistan, you didn't really believe in ending wars. When you did massive deregulation of the economy yet again, and you cut taxes for the rich, you're not economically populist. When 93,000 jobs were outsourced under your first year as president, which is even more than Obama, and you ran as the anti-outsourcing guy, you don't really mean it. You don't really believe it. So again, I pose this to Tucker in all sincerity. If you actually believe these things you say about policy, the only logical conclusion is you have to support the Bernie Sanders types, the Tulsi Gabbard types, the Ro Khanna types, the AOC types. And obviously, it appears like you're not quite there yet. You'd rather give lip service to how awesome all their policies are, but pretend like still, for some reason, whoa, you can't support them. They're crazy. That makes no sense, and I think that makes no sense.